Hi, this is Natalie Hoffman of FlyingFreeNow.com, and you're listening to the Flying Free Podcast, a support resource for women of faith looking for hope and healing from hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. Welcome to episode 36 of the Flying Free Podcast. Rachel, you're back with me this time.
Hi. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It has.
We've had a lot of guest interviews, and so it's good to be back here with you. And I thought it would be fun not fun, but I thought it would be a good topic to talk about. We're calling this episode, He Loves Me Not, because one of the most common issues that women in emotionally abusive relationships have is trying to figure out, is this really abuse? Is this abusive? And is it really that bad? Because sometimes my husband is really wonderful and there's a lot of really wonderful qualities about him, which is the reason why I married him. And then at other times it seems like it might be abusive, but don't all marriages have problems? And I am not perfect either. Sometimes I have problems. So what is it that makes, how do you differentiate between a normal marriage with your garden variety arguments and that kind of thing versus a marriage that actually you could define it as being emotionally abusive? So that's what we're going to talk about today. What do you think?
I think there's a lot to get to here. I've got my flower ready. I'm going to pick off the petals. He loves me not. That's what that makes me think of. No, I already know the answer to that one. So
yes. Okay. So, well, and that is kind of how you feel. I think in a normal relationship, even though there's problems, there's still never that feeling of doubt. Like,
no.
Does he really love me? You still know, we had an argument, but I know that he really loves me.
Yeah, it's built on that foundation, a really solid foundation of love.
Yes. So I think even that, just to even know that if you are experiencing that feeling of, on a regular basis of, I'm not really sure if this guy really sees me or knows me or even really loves me on a deep level, then that's a red flag. It's something that's certainly... Well, it's a good thing that you're here listening to this podcast because we're going to talk about that. So what I'd like to do first, Rachel, is define what the problem is. Why is this important that we should even be talking about this?
Right. So I think you can boil it down to the fact that people who are, have narcissistic tendencies, who have levels of toxic pride that they don't want to overcome, they act in inconsistent ways. And their ways, what they do, maybe even inconsistent with what they say. So in my previous marriage, my husband was really good about saying, I love you. We always said I love you when we got off the phone, or even when we left the room. I'd always say, I love you. And he'd always say, love you. But he didn't act like that. He never put that into practice. If you think of love as like a self-sacrificial, getting into the other person's world and loving them for who they are. That was never the experience there. Instead, I was always afraid that if I did something, he would stop loving me. Like if I gained too much weight or if I didn't do something that he had told me specifically to do, that it was all off the table. So there was very much this level of insecure attachment that was going on. But it wasn't like that all the time. And sometimes he would do loving things like, I don't know, bring me home a new water bottle or bring flowers home or something to that effect. And I would think, oh, he really does love me. And I shouldn't think so poorly of him, and be so, wish that he would be different sometimes. Like, oh, he really does.
Right. So it reminds me of, I've mentioned this before. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it on the podcast, but I've definitely talked about this before. But there's a show on HBO called Big Little Lies. And there's actually a book also written by Leanne Moriarty and by the same name. But the show, there's 2 seasons of it. And if you guys who are listening, if you can get a chance to watch that series, it's a perfect example of the cognitive dissonance that happens in an abuse target's life, where So the only thing is, and actually I like it that it's this extreme. Here, Nicole Kidman is the victim, and she actually, she really thinks that her marriage is okay. I mean, she knows there's problems, but so on the one hand, they have great sex, like amazing sex. He's really a wonderful dad. It shows him a lot with his kids, playing with them, like really getting into their world and really caring about them. And he's also really wonderful to her. But the dark side is that he actually beats her and until, so she's got bruises and cuts and that kind of thing. And so that's an extreme case. So, but most of our listeners aren't living in that kind of extreme swings. However, the same dynamic is happening. So, and it's the same cognitive dissonance. It's on the one hand, they've got all of these great qualities, and there are some really good things about the relationship that keep you on your toes, that keep you like wondering, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing when he's not being kind. But then on the other hand, they may be doing these more subtle kinds of abuse tactics. So let's actually talk about some of the more subtle kinds of abuse, because that's what I think most of our listeners are dealing with. They're not necessarily being beaten. And a lot of, in our culture, even in our culture though, if you had a friend who was being beaten, you'd be like, man, you got to get out of that marriage. You got to get out. You're going to be killed someday. But the person inside of the marriage really doesn't necessarily feel that she's in danger, because she sees this guy when he's being good and stuff. And so, but when you got covert abuse going on, you're not even getting outside feedback from, people on the outside. All they see is the amazing stuff that this guy's doing. And they're not seeing you show up with bruises. And so they don't understand. If you don't understand and they don't understand, how in the world are you going to see what's actually going on in the relationship and that it's even abusive? So let's talk about, that was a very long introduction to talking about some of the covert tactics that are used in an emotionally abusive relationship. So maybe you could talk about some of the things that you experienced or that you've heard other people experience.
So the biggest thing for me that I never was able to put my finger on was that my husband never took responsibility for himself. If there was a problem between the two of us, he would, there would be an argument or whatever, and then he would stonewall me. He would ignore me until I came to him and told him that I was sorry for whatever I had done, raised my voice, been rude, whatever. But then he would talk to me about how I needed to do better and how I just needed to do what he said, and never talk about his role. And he didn't even believe he had a role. It was all my fault.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest one that we can identify, is just this subtle blame shifting. And sometimes I think it's even more subtle than that, because my husband never apologized ever. He would never say those words. He thought that was really stupid to apologize. He didn't have any use for apologies. But other people, I think, do. They have husbands who apologize, but they don't really mean it, because they'll start in with excuses afterwards, or the apology is just empty and it doesn't result in any change. Because apologies that don't result in repentance and, a new leaf of trying to not act that way anymore really is pretty meaningless. The words are supposed to represent something, an action, as something changed. And without that change, it really is meaningless.
Right.
So looking for that changed behavior, I think, is really big when assessing whether or not someone is really sorry. But so just using the words to manipulate people can be really tricky, because you don't know if they really mean it. But you have to see if their actions line up with their words.
Right. So I did what you're talking about. I actually just did 2 videos this week. And if you're listening, you can find them on my YouTube channel, which I don't even know what the URL is for that. Look up Natalie Hoffman on YouTube. I think you should find a link.
Maybe you can put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, I'll put a link in the show notes. But one of the videos talks about, it gives 30 emotionally abusive tactics, covert emotional abuse tactics. So you could, find more details in that video. And then the other video talks about crappy apologies. So all the different ways that these guys can, or that, that anyone can apologize, but not really mean it. So, I know one thing that happened a lot with me in my relationship is I would see a problem maybe with the kids or with myself, see a behavior that he was doing that was really causing a problem. It was causing a lot of pain or hurt. And I would tentatively bring it up because I was nervous. Because I knew what was going to come next. It was the same thing time after time. It never ever changed, but I'd bring it up to see if I could have a meeting of the minds, to see if I could get him to understand what he had done that was so painful. Mm-hmm. Because I wanted him to have good relationships with his kids. I wanted him to have a good relationship with me. I wanted us to be close, but there was this behavior that was causing this pain. And so how can you get close to someone who's hurting you? Right. So I would bring it up and want to talk about it, and he would turn it back on me. Mm-hmm. It would somehow be what he did would somehow be my fault. Mm-hmm. Or he would make comments like, well, you think that you're better than I am, just because I brought up so all of a sudden it was about me and how I thought I was better than him rather than being about what he did and how much pain that had caused for people in our family. Mm-hmm. So that is an actual, so if anyone's listening and you are thinking, boy, that happens to me, you need to know that's not a normal behavior. That's actually a covert abusive behavior. Mm-hmm. And it can be normal we all will react to feedback in a defensive way at first, right? Yeah. If you don't respond in a defensive way, deep down inside, your bristles are going to go up if someone brings up something that they want you to work on. Correct? Mm-hmm. That's just human nature. But so it's nature to, and you could even, your spouse could even be like, well, no, I don't think it was that. I don't think it really made that big of a difference, or I don't think it really hurt the kid that much, or I don't know why you're feeling, I didn't really mean it that way. And don't you understand what I was really trying to communicate there? And okay, they could do that. That's fine. But then if they don't circle back and make it right with you or acknowledge that your perspective was different from theirs, that's the problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if they shut you down and say, you know what, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm not talking about this anymore. Okay. That's actually abusive. Mm-hmm. You can't do that. If you're in an intimate relationship with somebody, it's normal it's okay to say, you know what, I need to think about this. I didn't realize that I caused that kind of pain, but I need to think about it because I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm not, I don't know what to think. That's okay. Yeah. But then circle back and say, hey, you know what? I've been trying to think about this, like how you might have taken it from your perspective. And I can see how it came across that way. And I'm really sorry. I don't want to hurt you. I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah. But be careful, because even some people, I think, and I see this in the private Flying Free support community group posts, like a lot of times abusers will use the language of like, oh, like I was saying earlier, oh, I'm sorry, or, oh, I do see that I need to work on this. But then it is always paired up with something that you need to do better, or some reason that you did something bad. And so that is, I think, a really big red flag, is if huge, they're acting humble, but then they go back and say, but it was actually you. Yep. And it's so confusing because you take the humility and you're glad for it and you want to jump on it and be like, okay, everything's going to be great. He's taking responsibility for himself, but then it turns back around and there's that blame shift to you. And it's just, I think that's the really telltale sign. And that's what you have to go with, unfortunately, even though you don't want it to be that way.
Yep. Another one is just really, it's whenever you show up as yourself with a different opinion than what he holds. So if you say no to him for whatever reason, that's going to be a problem.
Yep.
Or if he wants something to go a certain way and you disagree and you'd like to discuss it, that's going to be a problem too. You're going to be shamed or criticized for having a different perspective than he does. So in other words, basically, you're safe if you enfold yourself into his mind and into his perspective. But if you show up with your own mind and your own perspective, you'll be criticized. That's like a no-no, big no-no.
Yeah, you're not allowed to be your own separate person from him. You have to be right in line with who he is and what he values and what he thinks. And if you don't, I mean, this was huge for me in my marriage. My husband had very strong opinions about the world and everything else in it. And for the most part, I was pretty aligned with him. But if there was something that I thought was stupid, I had to keep to myself because I could not speak up ever and say, here's why I think that's wrong, because he would berate me down or have some clever argument about why I was wrong and also dumb.
Yep. Another one that comes to mind that I dealt with is there's going to be times in a relationship where you fall apart. Maybe your friend died. Maybe you just had a new baby. Maybe your child is really sick and in the hospital. Maybe you're really stressed out because of work or because of something really emotionally or traumatic in a relationship with someone at church, or, just for whatever reason, things happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they won't enter into that experience with you. Instead, they expect you to be on your A game, basically, 100% of the time. Yep. And if you are not, then you have failed as a human being.
Right. There's no room for you to be a genuine human with skin and made of flesh, as the Bible calls it. Like there's no room for that kind of weakness. And actually, with my husband, he despised any form of weakness, what he viewed as forms of weakness. So he could not handle it. And it's funny, Natalie, you talk about like stressful life situations. So I didn't even have someone die, but the catalyst for what set, me thinking like, oh, there's something wrong here was when I lost my job through no fault of my own. And here, it's just so funny, the irony of it. I'd always thought of my husband as this really strong leader. Like he was, he just had these really strong opinions and he knew right from wrong and all these things. He could not get out of bed. And he was blaming me because of all the circumstances. And if I had done this differently and I've done that differently, and you better hurry up and get a new job. He was not a leader. He was the opposite of a leader. He couldn't handle it.
That is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it is. And I was so deluded though, and it was my way of excusing him, by saying like his strong opinions mean he's just a strong leader. No, right. He's just his own prideful God. Like he's his own God in his own mind. He's stuck up in toxic pride. He can't handle this because it's an injury to that pride.
Yes. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay. So let's talk about what it looks like. Now I'm remarried and you are, do you want to say it in public or should we wait?
I am engaged.
Yay!
Yay!
Rachel got engaged since our last episode together, I believe.
Yes. I am so grateful to be in a relationship with someone who is the opposite of what we're talking about here. He takes responsibility for himself. He apologizes. He has good character. He is actually a strong leader because under pressure, he doesn't crumble. So I am so grateful and so excited to do life with him.
That is awesome. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
So tell me, how is your relationship different? What is he like when you have your whole meeting and getting to know him was around you basically going through a really hard time in life. So
yeah, we had worked together, but while I was still married in a really stressful situation where there was long hours and everything. And I have never seen him get angry or raise his voice or use guilt or shame to get people to do what he wants. He's just who he is. He's sort of reserved, but he knows exactly what he thinks, and he's got very strong principles that he stands by, but he doesn't push them on other people. He just accepts people for where they are. And that's such a gift, because I have been quite a mess at times over the course of our relationship. And he just is there with me in it. And I think that's a huge difference. I never had that kind of support before in my first marriage. It was just always like, oh, Rachel has some problem. Well, you better deal with it and hurry up and get back to having sex with me, or, making dinner or taking care of our kid or whatever it was. It was always like I had expectations for what I was supposed to do, and I wasn't allowed to step outside them and what it really comes down to is feeling safe to be a person and to be weak and to need support. And that it comes from a very vulnerable place of like, I actually don't have it all together, and I actually don't have it all figured out. And again, as I just said, like, so that sort of weakness, my ex-husband despised and could not tolerate. But in my new relationship, he sees it and he understands it and he knows it and he accepts it, and he's there with me to get through it. And I have the ability to do the same for him. When he's stressed out or whatever else, he lets me in to be there to support him. And that's what relationships are supposed to be.
Yes.
And what you can't even really call what I had before a relationship. It was like I hate to say it this way, but like sort of like a parasite, like someone taking resources from another person. Yep. And it's not even symbiotic where it goes back and forth. It's just sucking all those resources and giving nothing back.
Yep.
And it's quite a stark way to frame that, but that's how I lived for 14 years.
Yeah. Well, and it comes back to the whole idea of you being a separate person. Mm-hmm. So your fiance views you and values you as a separate human being from him.
Yeah.
So he's not trying to get you to mesh with him and become him and think the way he thinks and look the way he looks and enter into his world and be his, he's not like the sun that you're supposed to revolve around. No. You are each two separate people, and you're both looking at one another as two separate valuable human beings.
Yeah. And giving each other permission to be separate, valuable human beings. Whereas before, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, like I was just my husband's showpiece, something that he got to show off and say he had a hot wife or whatever, which was it was so crazy because it was mixed messages, because then he would talk about, how chubby I was or something like that. But I was supposed to dress in a way that made him happy. And that was the opposite of the way I liked to dress and how I felt comfortable. But, and I was so mixed up. I did that because I wanted him to be happy with me. And I thought that was what Christian women were supposed to do, is just make their husbands happy. But I wasn't a separate person. I was just something like a decoration or a toy, something to play with, something to keep yourself amused until you didn't need it or want it anymore.
Right.
And then he was off to do other things. So, it's just very much dehumanizing.
Yes.
To be treated that way.
Is this content resonating with you? I've written a book for women of faith in destructive relationships called Is It Me? Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage, a Christian woman's guide to hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. You can actually read reviews and find out more about my book on Amazon.com. It comes in paperback, Kindle, and Audible formats. I've also got a website specifically focused on helping women of faith find hope and healing. It's called flyingfreenow.com. I'll even give you the first 3 chapters of my book free if you want to hop on my mailing list at the top of my website. Those 3 chapters are going to help you figure out if your relationship is normal or destructive. Now, let's get back to our episode. One of the things that I've been fascinated by in that I've learned in the last few years is because I'm remarried. I've been remarried now for almost 2 years. And my current husband and I, we come out of two completely different denominational backgrounds, church denomination backgrounds. We are on different sides of the political, I don't want to get into politics, but we are on the same side as far as a lot of our beliefs about things, but as far as our party alignment in general,
how to carry those beliefs out. Yes.
Exactly.
That's what it always comes down to.
We are on different, we're on different polar opposites in that way. But here's the thing. So in my prior marriage, we went to the same church. We had the same political beliefs. We had the same eschatology. We say, but here's the thing. You can have all the same beliefs and you can still be in an abusive relationship and have it be abusive. And you can also have completely different beliefs or completely different perspectives on things and have a really healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And the key is just this mutual love and respect for the other person as an individual. You can actually, that's the way friendships should be. And I really think that I see this a lot in religious circles, and I was part of this, and I participated in it, where you feel like you can only be friends with people, or you can only love people or only respect people who are exactly like you, who look like you, think like you, talk like you, read the same books that you read, have the same beliefs that you believe, have the same eschatology, have the same, all the way down the line, listen to the same pastors, and that's not true. Well, that's one of my huge epiphanies in the last few years is that's just completely not true. In fact, that really limits your ability to grow as a human being if all you're doing is surrounding yourself with people who think exactly the way you think.
Yeah. And you know what, though? It's amazing, though, when you have this shift in perspective and you start reading the Bible again, the Gospels again, you see that Jesus did this. Like, he came to where people were, and he was helping them where they were. Like the woman with the issue of blood, he reached out and touched her, even though she was ritually unclean, and completely cast out from a society, that he went to her and was there with her where she was and healed her where she was. And I think that's so what we're called to do. And we just miss the broader Christian culture just misses this so much. Like being with people where they are and showing them the love of Christ where they are, instead of saying, buck up, get yourself cleaned up. And then so the message is sort of like, God loves you, but he'll love you more when you do this or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that's what's received a lot of times, instead of God's love is going to, start working with you where you are and healing you. And it's going to be a long journey, but he's going to be with you and he loves you, beyond your understanding. And I think that it's just such a miss. And we have got to learn how to love again in Christian culture. And I think it's starting, but there's a long ways to go.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it's starting. I think there's a huge movement of people getting away from that kind of thinking. I would call it fundamentalism, but the us versus them mentality.
And really what it comes down to is I have the right view of God and everyone else has the wrong view of God. And so if people want to be close to me, they need to get with my picture of God, right? Instead of, and it's just out of alignment. Get some humility here. See yourself as you are. You don't have it all figured out, I promise you.
Exactly. So one of the last things that I wanted to, little kind of tidbits, and I talk about this quite a bit. So, but for those of you who haven't heard it, I talk about how the good things that people do are they're okay. Pretend that you're a fish, okay, and you need nourishment. And you need sustenance. And so one of the ways that you get that is by eating worms.
Delicious.
I don't know. So worms or other fish, I don't know. But anyway, so you need that, but what you don't need is you don't need a hook on the end of it. And the problem with abusive relationships is they dangle something that looks nourishing and that looks like it's going to be beneficial to you in front of you. And But the problem is that if you take a bite out of that, there's going to be a hook in it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start to realize and this doesn't have to just necessarily be your marriage relationship. It can be friendships. It can be your family members. If you have adult children, it can even be adult children that you have. It can be any relationship in your life. When you start realizing that every time they offer you something good, it comes with a price tag on it. Either they expect something from you or they, some kind of manipulation ploy, then that is not a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And you want to be in relationships where there's two little fish swimming next to each other, enjoying worms and other little fish freely without any hooks involved.
Yeah. Yep. Like in my marriage, I grew up in an abusive background. And so I didn't really know any better. And I just longed for a family and longed for someone to love me. And so my husband's family looked really good on paper. His parents weren't divorced. They seemed to have it all together. And that was quite a nice, juicy worm. And I didn't really understand that there was a hook in me until quite a long time later. But it was a really bad environment because I was not allowed to be a person. I was not allowed to have problems. I was not allowed to have needs. I was just there to serve a purpose. And that purpose was to serve him and meet his needs.
Yes. And I would venture to say that is not God's original plan for any of his children.
It's a perversion of that ideal, which is, we know where that comes from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to call this a wrap.
It was a great discussion.
All right. And thank you so much for listening. If you want to head over to I always want to say Apple iTunes. It's not Apple iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. That will help other people find this podcast, and share it with other people that you know who need to hear this, or maybe even other helpers, people in your church who are helping women who are in dysfunctional relationships, or parents of older children who might be in a relationship, so they can learn how this works and identify it, and then help these people with solutions and support them in what they're going through. And that's it for this week. Until next week, fly free.